I think, yeah, you are an artist that's in creative overdrive, so kudos to you for finally being able to put this together. Before touching into actual film, I'm curious about the alt comic universe that you belong to. More or less, somebody's been producing for an upwards close to 2 decades. I was wondering if you could briefly touch upon how that universe changes, not the fan base necessarily, but how you are able to get your voice out there, how you're able to share your creativity and a lot of yourself on the written form, if you will. How's that? How do you see that alt comic universe for the past since you began?
Well, I always loved comic books. My dad read comics, and so they were around, and they're extremely accessible to make. It just takes pen and a sheet of paper, and you can print them at Kinko's, and so that's a hugely empowering thing. That if you like visual storytelling and if you love the comic medium in particular, it's very direct and raw in being able to make comics. You don't have to really convince people to get involved. They're not very collaborative, especially if you publish them yourself. And then even when you move into alternative comics publishing, there aren't many gatekeepers. Like, you don't really need an agent. You can just go to a comics festival and hand it to Gary Groth or Drawn and Quarterly, or now there's tons of amazing smaller publishers. I mean, so many, and they will look at it, and if they are into it, they will publish it. So it's accessible in all ways, and also if you're it feels like it makes sense. You can put on a gallery show, but then how do you get people to come? There's something like comics, you can print them and they exist and they kind of magically spread through the world. Even if you do a low print run, it'll end up at someone's house and someone will pick it up, and then it kind of travels. And so they do have a real hidden
life form?
Secret circulation in the world. I started making them very early, and I kept making them. And as I got older, it was a combination of getting older and also my having an approach that was based on the story. So I would have the story first, and then the visuals would kind of be determined by the story, which is different than a lot of cartoonists. A lot of cartoonists have that comes out of doodling. Maybe the stories come out of things that they like to draw. While for me, the narrative informs how it's drawn, how it's printed, even the paper stock, all of this stuff. So it meant that my output is kind of confusing in that I've done kind of a lot of books now, and some of them have been popular, some of them have been unpopular, and some of them are about one of them was a web comic for many years that was kind of before there were a lot of alternative web comics. They've just been separate projects that seem to have separate fan bases, or I don't know. They just I never did a really good job of trying to get a tap on who was reading them. I think when I did that Body World webcomic in 2007, that's when I should have gone on Twitter and had a message board or something, or trying to figure out who was reading it. But
going into feature films, before we get into your directorial debut, you had the short that appeared a couple of years ago. You had you were implicated with John Cameron Mitchell on Rabbit Hole, and more recently with, I think it was James Strauss, the director for People, Places, and Things.
And I did a bunch of artwork for John Cameron Mitchell's movie that's coming out next
Really?
year.
Okay.
The Neil Gaiman story.
Yes.
How to Talk to Girls at Parties.
Yes.
And I did a series for IFC in 2009. They would run in between movies on the IFC channel.
So you've been thinking about film for a while. Does one inform the other art form more than vice versa, or like, how do you think when you're penning something, storyboarding something? Are you thinking in terms of perhaps your cinephilia, all the film references that you might have grown up with, not only your personal experiences, but like, films from the 80s, I imagine? Or is it the flip side of that?
The kind of animation that I really love, and I feel like I want to participate in, is kind of I call it limited animation, where it's usually made by cartoonists. Like the very first Astro Boy series was created by Tezuka, and so he was a great cartoonist. It was based on, maybe the best cartoonist, and it was based on his comic series, and he couldn't get a lot of money to make this show, but he just made it anyway. And so he used his skills as a comic book artist to make what I think is really incredible, unusual cinema. His composition, the compositions in the first Astro Boy series, to me, are breathtaking, and it's like a specific kind of form, and there are a lot of like the Speed Racer series. It kind of comes from that, and I feel like it to me, it's like the animated version of like independent cinema or like French New Wave. It's like combining your aesthetic with the budget to like harness it into this thing that is awesome and exciting, and like the DIY part of it is what makes it huger, more like radical, or
less constraint, free flowing.
It had, I use like the words that come to mind are like energy or something, like bold decision making, and that it combines like those, like obviously like the like Breathless is like a Hollywood like movie, but it's Godard's like messed up version of a Hollywood movie that he made with no money, and those limited animations, it's like, or like, to me, the 70s Devilman series, it's like, it has monsters and explosions, but it's drawn in a really like bold, direct, strange way that has like the spectacle parts of movies that I like, but also the it's like wherever like experimental film and like Hollywood
converge,
meet, it's cool, or is thrilling, or like a great ride.
I was thinking a lot about references like that. I was thinking about the Towering Inferno. I was thinking of NFB animated shorts from the mid 60s, perhaps early 70s, things that I grew up with. And I really enjoyed the color movement exists within this frame. I was wondering how you could, if you could just detail a little bit about that process. Like, how does coloring come into the scheme of things? The film begins with a little a warning, like the strobe effect warning. Like, it's very.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the like what I was saying, where experimental film and like Hollywood movies converge. Like there's like the last like 30 minutes of this movie are just like a relentless, spinning, and like, so there's a part where they're climbing through the bleachers, but they just keep climbing, like it's way longer than any bleachers would be. So it's like wherever the dial was from like a logical length of bleachers, the idea was to go like past that to where it's just like a gesture of ascent or something, that it's tipped past the literal world into just. I know people have said Poseidon Adventure a lot.
I could see. Yeah,
that's cool. Towering Inferno.
Yeah.
To me, again, kind of like I like Titanic came out when I was in high school, I think. So that was the starting point of just imagining a school filling with water. And then there's tons of anime that would have schools attacked by monsters. Like that's almost all the anime I grew up watching. If you think about that, Sailor Moon, Sarotsuki Doji, it's everything. And then there's comics like Assassination Classroom, Drifting Classroom, where a school drifts through a portal into another dimension where it's attacked by monsters. And so even like Battle Royale is kind of like these students.
It's a survival of the fittest, or dwindling of numbers.
Yeah, kind of something about the trauma of that of teenage years that I think high school scene is very clearly like it's like Towering Inferno or Poseidon Adventure. When the disaster strikes, they don't like stay talking about whatever they were talking about before. Like in high school thinking, the school starts thinking, but they're still talking about wanting to be writers or there's their relationships or something. So it's clearly like almost like it's a juxtaposition between between what we're seeing and the way people are reacting to it. Yeah, it's really
Could you?
Kind of goofy. It's goofy. A very goofy movie, as the Disney movie.
Let's talk about Jason's participation in this. How did you, besides obviously the art, the work at hand, how do you inform him on performance? Do you just like spend like a couple weekends with him just drinking coffee and him getting to know you as an adult and sort of getting to know you through your comics? Like, how does that process work for Jason? And how did you inform him on the performance on his character, his character named Dash?
Well, I've known Jason for
like pre-Rushmore.
10 years.
Okay, so
not pre.
Okay, cool.
No, but I think I met him in 2007 or 2008, so less than 10 years. And but he'd read my comics through that time, and I'd show him the IFC. So he knew what I was up to, and we'd walk around, and he's a reader, and he has a very obviously a very dry, strange sense of humor. That so I didn't really think he would come on board this, just because I wouldn't assume that a great actor would sign on or want to participate. But he just said yes immediately, and he already he's completely. The thing with all of the people on the movie is I didn't have to explain anything to them, because they got the sensibility of it. And there's a lot of lines in the movie. They're not really jokes, but they're like it's kind of a strange thing to say at this time, and some parts are I hope kind of laugh out loud funny, but most of the movie is just some kind of unusual humor that everyone wanted to participate in. He was just 100% game, and he knew that the character being named Ash was a joke, and that it wasn't like it wasn't based on me, or anything. Like he wasn't he kind of just got that it was that the movie was like this kid's fantasy, and the name is part of that, and that I think he just understood it, and
he didn't have too much of a homework assignment, is what you're saying. Just got your sense.
Maybe he'll say something different.
We'll see. You could try to elaborate on the tone or the mixer, the merger of those two worlds, and why you felt the need to make it not an equal balance, but to incorporate that into something like this.
I think the combination. I had done a comic short story. With this title in 2009, and one of the initial ideas for the premise was that when I was a teenager in the 90s, the two like opposing schools was auto-bio comics. Like that was most of the main alternative comics were auto-bio comics then.
Okay.
And then like boys adventure superhero comics, and the idea behind the short story was to merge those two, because when I was a kid I really liked both of them. Probably just because I liked the form. So to have a character named Dash and to keep it rooted in like auto-bio experiences, but have it warped and stylized into the boys adventure comic kind of language. And so I just thought that was a good idea. And then when I was thinking about it as a movie, I thought to maintain that, and so even it's like so obvious as to be silly to say, but like I really tried to keep each kind of dramatic section still based on something from the real world. So like the cafeteria is a disaster relief ward, but the students divide themselves just like they do in real cafeterias. There's a part where like a popular girl that's with the team kind of goes up to the senior floor below them, and they wonder if she's left their group of friends for like an older senior friend. Like they're very like typical situations that I've just warped. I think the reason why to do that is because it moves it closer to the feeling of it, where when a friend leaves your group, if it was a literal report of that happening, the emotional pitch of it wouldn't be as extreme enough that by putting it in this setting, it's heightening the emotional landscape.
Yeah.
It's like a dream world version of the real world.
There's also a video game component. I mean, I related it back to a video game that I spent many quarters on, an arcade game. I think it was called Renegade. But there was one portion, a fight portion, and there is a video game aspect to it, or at least arcade. Throwback to arcade. Could you discuss how the especially in the more dramatic thriller element acts? That's a template that you kind of grasp.
I don't play very many. I don't play any video games now, and I honestly didn't play them a ton when I was younger, but I would have friends who would invite me over to their places, and they'd make me watch them play games, you know? And so it's like, so I had a lot of experiences just watching it, and I think that informed it more than playing them.
Okay.
Because the language of those games is a lot like limited animation, you know, especially those arcade games where the drawings you aren't getting every single position in Street Fighter, and the camera angle is fixed. I remember, and the kind of overhead perspective of like the Legend of Zelda games makes sense to me, because I don't even know how to do like Pixar camera moves through three-dimensional spaces, and so when it comes to trying to figure out how to like where to put the imaginary camera, and I have to communicate something, I'll think, well, if it's this video game like perspective, then it's one background painting that's this, and the character I don't have to draw getting bigger or smaller in space because they're walking like how the Legend of Zelda characters walk. So there's a repeat. Lots of times characters have to move through from one room to another in high school syncing, and I didn't know how to animate that because of the space. It's kind of confusing to think. I'm not very good at drawing things getting bigger or smaller in space and keeping track of the scale. So, but I remember having watched Resident Evil, and when they move from one room to another, there's just a zoom through a door. So that's used a lot through high school syncing. Like she moves to the cafeteria, we have a zoom to cafeteria doors opening, and then it fades into the cafeteria. They move into the school, and the doors open. Hey, whenever a character moves from one room to another, I use that Resident Evil load. And it just makes sense.
So Dash, unfortunately, we have to cut the interview short. I wish we could talk more about the character set, and I actually have a really nice affinity for Susan Sarandon's character. So this film was shown at TIFF. It's going to New York.
And we're going to play Fantastic Fest too,
which is great. It's different festivals and different potential audiences. So I think it'll be fun to immerse yourself in that and see how it plays to different ears and eyes. And so thank you very much for your time. And congratulations on your first film.